It's over here. Morning. Morning back there. Morning, everyone. Welcome. So I'll call the meeting to order, the audit committee, first 2024. Motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second. No objections. We'll approve the agenda. No action items. And we'll start with the 2023 audit process with Sally. I understand the 2023 audit has already begun.
It has.
Good.
Meeting a little early. So good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah, usually we have this meeting a little earlier, so we are in active audit. We had field work this week and next week, so things are going well. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Files from YHB.
Back.
Thank you. She is our independent auditor, and she'll speak today about the communication letter that was attached to your packet about the audit process. I did just want to note from the memo that typically the committee will pick a functional area that they want to see reviewed in greater detail during the audit, but it's the committee could consider an audit with no specific recommendations this year due to, again, we're doing the single audit for our government funding. And additionally, there was new accounting pronouncements with the way we have to handle our subscription-based IT agreements, which was a large effort. So you could consider no additional functional area at this time.
That's a very important special functional area to do that part of that audit on the subscription licensing.
It was a large effort. Donna Kovalyak, our accounting manager, is the one who took that on this year. So it's just there's a lot of agreements, as Mike knows. And so establishing our policy, we have about 40 that hit our policy that then we had to scoop up as an asset and take the present value of it and depreciate it over the life of that asset is the new accounting standard. So it's just a consideration. So at this point, I will turn it over to Jennifer and she'll talk about the audit process.
I look at it as positive. The process is positive to the audit process.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's not something to be, it's just what we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Does that prospect have a FASB number, or is there something what's it called?
GASB 96.
GASB, what is it?
96.
96, that's what I was looking for.
I can't believe I know that.
Is there an equivalent FASB for non-governmental? Is that going into just government? Okay, just curious. I can bug our CFO. And while we're on that, if you don't mind, Jennifer, what is the origin of that? Why is that coming out now? It looks like it started in earlier last year in a 2022 pronouncement, and it started 2023. And as I understand it, it's you have a reliance on an outside subscription, and if that were to end, you would be you wouldn't be able to function basically without that. So I guess it's somewhat of a reliance on an outside vendor.
I think GASB over the last few years has done a lot of work to bring transparency, consistency to financial reporting. And years ago, they began looking at the lease standard, and that brought more consistency in financial reporting, brought assets and liabilities onto the balance sheet. Because previously, between capital leases and operating leases, you would have some entities putting things on the balance sheet and others would be flushing through the income statement. They would never hit the balance sheet. So that lease standard put all of that to be a little more comparative. I think in that process, the subscription-based IT arrangements, I think that topic popped up in that lease discussion, that evolution of leases. Because it's the same concept. Some organizations will purchase things that become assets and are depreciated or amortized. Other organizations would lease them, would rent them, would purchase a subscription from a third party, and that asset would never become the entity's asset. It would never hit the balance sheet. It would just be a rental expense, if you will, an operating expense. So I think the 96, the SBITA, the subscription-based IT arrangement standard, really was an attempt to have all governmental entities look at and evaluate their arrangements to make it more consistent. So Mike and his team and finance, this has been, I think, maybe a couple of year process.
Mhm.
While you have 40 that hit the policy, first they created a policy, threshold and the criteria within the standard. Then they gathered all of the information to be able to determine what items, what contracts hit the policy, meet the policy to be implemented. But there were a lot that did not. They fell below policy thresholds. They fell into the exceptions within the standard that were allowable. So even though 40 is a big number, but you probably evaluated
You still had to do the whole inventory.
hundreds
So
beyond that.
Yeah. It's
Wow,
really.
yeah.
It's a big piece. So a lot of our work now in this year of implementation is going to be spent focused on, one, looking at the policy, which we already have. It's a good policy. I can't say that when we have the meeting early. I can't comment on how the policies are then.
Right, right,
This
right.
part in the process, I can say.
You've already looked at it.
But we're going to put a lot of time and effort into looking at those 40 arrangements that hit the policy and are recorded, the calculations, agree them to the actual contracts and agreements to make sure they're recorded properly. But then also testing some of those that didn't get implemented to make sure that they did not need to be implemented.
Mhm.
So it's both directions. So that will be new additional testing that the teams aren't accustomed to just because it's a new implementation. And it will be heavier this year in year of implementation. If all goes well and the tests come out clean this year, then next year it will be more of looking at new arrangements that hit. We'll look for amendments and changes in the contract terms for anything, because in our world, any change equals the risk. So we'll look for changes, but the sampling and the testing of them will not be as heavy as it's going to feel for the team this year. And then, as Sally mentioned, we also do still have federal rewards in excess of $750,000. And that continues at this point to be the threshold for the compliance audit.
Single on it?
The single audit.
Yeah.
Mhm. So with that spending over 750, that we will conduct the compliance audit again this year, and then also report and issue for the submission of the data collection form.
I remember
Federal audit
last year
questions.
when we did the first single audit, there was, I forget the standard, I meant to look it up, but after you do so many, you stop at some point. Is it 3, is it, or I don't know if you stop, but the requirements to report aren't as, there was something that if you did multiple of these single audits, that something happens after a certain point in time.
Yeah,
Sorry, I just didn't
you
remember
are
what it was.
correct. After you have 2 successful, timely, clean single audits, you do then qualify as a low-risk auditee.
That's what it is. Okay.
So that will be the piece. So this year, still high risk, still larger samples to be tested in each of the different areas of funding. But again, things are going well so far from what we've tested so far in the single audit. So if this one comes through as a clean process and is filed timely, which I have no reason to think it won't be filed timely, then if you have federal awards over $750,000 next year and need the compliance audit again, it will be a low risk audit.
Always got it.
And then that will, all it really does is reduces some of the sample sizes that we can pull, that we can test in the process.
Yeah.
But if we have our discretion, if we get in and we make a sample of 40, we do control testing and we do compliance
Mhm.
testing in a single audit. If we get in and do our samples of any of those and we have questions, concerns, findings, we always have the ability to expand the samples and continue further. But normally, with the type of funding that you are receiving now, within a sample of 40 or 60 items in each of those areas, we have a pretty good feel if there's things that are inconsistent or inaccurate. So, but the samples are 60 in each of the different buckets this year because you are still considered a high-risk auditee.
Okay, thank you.
One quick question, are we going to talk about the policy thresholds? I don't want to like start asking questions that might be covered in your presentation. I'm just curious as to what those thresholds are for why 40 made it and others didn't. I mean, I don't want to get
Well, it was the
overcomplicated.
size of the,
That's all.
so if when we scooped up the asset, it was greater than, I want to say it was 40,000 was our threshold, or was it 20,000?
I don't remember.
Wonder if Donna's on, she would know.
I mean, whether it's 40
20
or
to
20.
40.
Okay,
So it was the size based of the,
so even something as small as a $30,000 lease has to be accounted for.
Evaluated, yes. So, so we recommended, I mean, the lease standard is everything. It's, if you have a copier for 5 years, and that you're leasing, it's, if you're software, hardware, things that you're leasing from an organization, it's all part of, everything falls into either a lease standard or the subscription-based IT arrangement standard. So organizations create this policy, this threshold that chops off some of the very small routine things that, in my opinion, you're going to spend more time tracking, analyzing, depreciating monthly than what it's necessarily worth to do that work. So every organization, based on size and complexity nature of the organization, crafts this policy and sets a threshold for things that they still gathered the information in the agreements, they still evaluated it, but ultimately, if the whole agreement was less than the 20 or 40,
let's say
40, then it wasn't booked and recorded as the asset and then depreciated.
So how did we, are there like guidelines to help people determine these policy thresholds, or is it that kind of really open to interpretation for each?
It's really open. There's been a number of articles that have talked about setting policies and thresholds, but it depends on the size of the organization. A $40,000 threshold for an organization the fraction the size of Loudon Water wouldn't make sense because nothing would hit that policy or above. But the size of Loudon Water, you know, if you hit a policy of $1,000 or $2,000, it would be every single item, every single contract, because you have to look at the value for the whole term. A lot of these contracts are not 1-year contracts. They're 3, 5, 7, 10-year contracts, agreements. So you have to look at that value over the whole thing. And a lot of these things are expensive contracts. So I think all of that went into play to determine this threshold for Loudon Water and what makes sense.
Okay.
So that 40 number is the value of the contract over the entire contract, not just a 1-year value.
Okay, thank you.
So as Sally mentioned, we have provided to you a copy of our pre-audit letter. It goes through the standard language of independence, risk assessment, materiality. I don't think any of that has really changed from the prior year letter. We do evaluate and maintain independence with the organization. If at any point in time, if you have any concerns or questions on independence, please let us know. But as Sally mentioned also, we had a very successful preliminary field work back in January. Everything went very well during that process. We are 4 days and a few hours into the first week of field work, and everything is going very well in the process. It's very clean. They've been very responsive so far this week. So I think we're on schedule for our normal timeline for the audit process. So thank you.
How many people do you have, how many workers do you have here from YHB doing field work?
We are working in a remote fashion this week. We have 4 staff members and myself working on the engagement. We have other team members with specialties that we bring in that complement our team. So we have a risk advisory services team led by Brian Newland. He will probably be here at the exit meeting that we have. He works closely with Mike and his team because we evaluate a lot of the control environment within the computer systems, user access and all of that to complement the financial statement audit piece. And then we also use some team members on our pension and retirement plan team because there are specific requirements and testing that we do with your pension, OPEB, VRS, all those areas that we utilize those team members to complement the governmental financial team in the audit process.
Thank you.
Anything else? Questions that you have? Any concerns that you have?
Just, yeah, a question, because it keeps coming up in my words, is ICFR, control over financial reporting. And there was a statement in your letter that said an audit is not designed to provide assurance of internal control over financial reporting and compliance or to identify significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. Just why is that?
Mhm.
Why is that it's not designed to do that?
It's a great question. Thank you. So there is the internal control over financial reporting. An organization can have an audit of their internal controls. That is not a financial statement audit. We have not done that service for Loud and Water. It is an option. A lot of times you'll find that in SEC registered clients. They have an audit that audits internal controls and they issue an opinion on their internal control environment.
Mhm.
It's a separate scope, separate engagement. You are not required to have that level of service, but you're welcome to if the committee or board would ever choose to do that. But we do have to look at your internal control environment to be able to properly plan and perform and execute a financial statement audit. So within Loud and Water's audit specifically, we evaluate the control environment. We do process walkthroughs of all of the different cycles of the organization, receipts, disbursements, payroll, inventory, assets, all of those things. We do control testing in key areas, not all areas. And then also with the single audit, we do more control testing in areas that relate to federal funding. But the internal control over financial reporting that you have in a governmental, in a GAG as financial statement audit, it is really just designed to make sure that we have properly planned and performed a financial statement audit. And we do not issue an opinion on your internal control environment.
In the course of committee and say, we recommend or we think we should think about doing an internal control audit?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Over the years, if you look back, there are some years we have had recommendations. Nothing in my time with Loud and Water has risen to a material weakness. I don't recall there being significant deficiency. So there's three layers of deficiency: material weakness being the most severe, significant deficiency, and then control deficiency. Below that, below the deficiency ladder, you'll have general best practices and recommendations that could come out as well, maybe just for efficiency purposes. But I think we have had control recommendations maybe from time to time, and then some best practice recommendations. That's a byproduct of our work that we look at when the internal control environment and also the detailed testing that we do. We will always bring those to the committee. If there is something that rises to a concern of ours, we will certainly bring that back to our exit conference. Quite frankly, if it's big enough and warranted, we will reach out to the committee before we even get to that exit conference.
Okay.
We also, in that process, we look for mitigating controls that would help reduce the risk of an area. So, for example, there may be a process in place or a policy in place that is the main line for how something is transacted. it may not be the most efficient, or it may not have the best approval process or control process to it. But we look around that environment as well to see if there are other mitigating factors that would reduce the risk. And we do consider that before we make any recommendations.
Okay.
Does the committee have any concerns of non-compliance or knowledge of non-compliance with laws and regulations?
I have no concern.
No,
No,
Any knowledge or suspicion of fraud within the organization?
No.
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 Any concerns that we should be aware of as we're going through the process? Anything that you would like for us to consider or look at closer?
Yeah, I know we've done that in previous years and looked at specific areas, but I didn't have any this year, especially with the single audit and the IT,
Chief stuff.
IT audit as well. I think that covers the landscape. I didn't have any. Terry, as chairman, did you have any?
I don't have any concerns.
Okay.
No, I'm real pleased with the process we're going.
Yeah,
through.
all right,
And we've been on this board, the committee for some time, so.
yeah,
Just so everyone knows, we are available to you year round. So at any point in time, if you have questions or concerns, you are welcome to call me and we can talk through whatever questions and concerns you have. We can look at anything throughout the year. The audit is a process and we have a plan through it, but we work for the committee and for the board. So at any point in time, if you have questions or concerns, we are happy to help you in any way.
okay. That's good to me.
So we see audit taking additional time this year with these
Yeah, that's a good
these
question.
two.
I don't think so. Sally and Donna, their team have been amazingly responsive in the process. We started asking for things for prelim in January, and then even into middle of February, we start asking for a lot of things so that we can do our risk assessment and our planning procedures. And everything was uploaded timely. We've been able to get through a lot of that before we even hit Monday this week. So I really look for next week to roll into questions, maybe some loose items, some things that roll over from this week.
Mhm.
And then Sally and Donna will roll into Act for Prep. So they'll begin preparing the annual financial report. Once they're finished and they go through their internal reviews, we get a copy of the documents. We go through 3 layers of review internally on our end. And then we also utilize the GFOA's Certificate of Excellence checklist
Mhm.
to go through to make sure that you continue to receive that certificate for your ACFR.
Great.
And it's not just Donna and I, just.
No, it's not.
This is an opportunity to thank Mike and his
You're gonna be
team,
busy.
Courtney with the SPIDAs and HR, land development. Everybody's been super responsive. So when we have a question that is outside our functional area, all of Kind of Loud and Water responds really
Mhm.
quickly. So it's nice. So thank you to everyone who's.
Appreciate that.
It is a big team effort.
Yeah. Good. Didn't have anything else? Karen?
Anything else on the engagement letter, or do you have a presentation, right?
No,
You
that's
don't?
it.
Okay. I have a couple questions on the single audit. What did we spend 750,000? What was it? The specifics of that?
Yeah, so we have a 10 million, 10 million max VDEM grant for the Milestone Reservoir.
Okay.
And what we've spent so far today, we've been reimbursed about 400K for that. The ARPA funding from the state and local funding, that's doing the Paonian Springs water study. We've spent 311,000 so far on that. This is 2023. That's $3 million we got from Loudoun County, and we're drawing down from it as we have expenses. And then there were some little fundings. We did get our COVID money
Mhm.
dispersed to us this year. That was 120,000. And then the LEWAP funding also that we had this year, that's only 16,000. But
What was the
It's still
COVID?
over 750.
Yeah, what was the COVID? Was that PPE? Was that PPE or was that?
testing.
Yeah, most of it was PPE and then they allowed, when we returned to work, we were doing weekly testing of staff. And that was eligible for reimbursement as well.
So we're gonna be filing this report for many years because we're gonna be continuing to spend money on the quarry of that 10 million.
Yes,
I agree.
so to Mr. Kelly's point, hopefully next year we.
Yeah, well, then we'll be the low risk.
Yes,
But-
yeah,
but
but-
Getting money from grants is not a bad thing.
No,
No,
No, if you have to go through that, that's.
might as well get as much as you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
True enough.
That's a great point. So a
Mhm.
lot of organizations, they'll have one or two federal programs, and it's pass-through money as well. So if it comes federal, state, and or county into you, it all qualifies. But when you get into this arena of having the single audit, and especially annually for a period of time, it is well worth the effort to see what else is available and options to increase it.
Mhm.
Because if you're paying for the audit and you're going through the work of the audit, if there's other funding sources that are available, I mean, each one should be evaluated because sometimes there are a lot of additional requirements that may not be worth taking the money
Mhm.
from someone. But at least evaluate what funding sources are available, and is it worthwhile to Loudon Water to take on additional funding sources that can be used?
So I was looking on the government website about the single audit. One of the big things that they want to see is, have you followed the rules in dispersing the grant? So do we have processes in place that make sure that as we spend these monies that we're adhering to the rules and regulations associated with those? Is that something that who at Loudon Water supervises that? Does that show up in the audit? Are we looking at making sure that the implementation of that money was spent according to the restrictions?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we provide to Jennifer is one of the things they asked for is like, how are we trained and, what did we do to make sure we're following all the regulations with the single audit, like for the VDEM, the pre-mitigation disaster FEMA funding. We're working with a third party, Arcadis, to help us make sure we're doing all of that. For the ARPA funds that are coming from the county, before we do anything, we check with them to make sure that everything adheres to them because we're the sub-recipient of that money. But there's trainings and we read the regulations and all of those things. So it kind of varies because the county has like a grants office specific for that. We don't have that here. And so we do our best ourselves to train and if we need help, we work with others. Yeah.
Does YHB get involved in making sure that Loudon Water is, because you are signing off on the single audit, so I assume.
That's what our testing is.
Okay,
So each federal award is given an assistant listing number. It used to be the CFDA number, now it's the ALN number. That ALN number gives us guidance. Each agency lays out 6 or 8 areas that they feel are important to them for testing in the single audit process. The options are A through N. Each one of them has their own type of testing, but since the 2000, I think maybe 18 revision, they're limited to about 6 to 8 of the special tests. So each one of those, we pull the ALN number for each one of your funding sources, and we look, what does that federal agency deem to be most important to them? And that's what we test to. The things that happen in almost every single audit is allowability. Is it the right type of expenditures going to the right places? Period of performance. Did you spend it in the right period, the right timeline? Reporting always hits in there because some grants will have quarterly reporting requirements or annual reporting requirements. We test those to make sure that if Loudon Water took money and said, I will report back to the agency every 90 days that we've done whatever we were supposed to do, we test that to make sure that they've done that proper reporting timely. So that's the compliance side of the single audit piece. The control environment side is making sure that Loudon Water has set up policy and process to execute the use of the funds. Making sure that there's an approval process for the types of monies that are being dispersed. There should be a process in place to make sure that you're spending it for allowable cost items and it's not just being spent on things that the grant does not allow.
Right.
So that's really what makes up the whole single audit. And then at the end of the process, we'll have a separate reporting package that will have our opinions. It will have a CFA, a schedule of expenditure of federal awards that lays out the different types of funding that Loudon Water's received and spent this year. And then there'll be a page of notes and some information to the reader that shows type of opinion, if it's an unmodified opinion, type of opinion on the federal awards. Down towards the very bottom, there is a section that is the one place that you can document that you were or were not a low risk auditee. That's the only place that shows up, is on 2/3 of the way down that one page. It identifies to the reader of that report which programs we determined and were determined to be type A programs. So there are type A and type B programs in a single audit. The type A programs generally are larger in nature and receive more of the testing. So as Sally went through the 3 or 4 different types that you have this year, the one for $16,000, it will not get the same attention from us as the ARPA money or the FEMA money that you spent much more on.
At what point does an organization need a grants person? I guess when you have so much money that's coming in and out, they have to maintain all these grants and I mean, we don't need one at now. Brian said we don't have one. We're fine. We're comfortable that we have enough controls in place to make sure that we're managing all these grants properly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that you're to that point. But it depends on where you're going and what your plans are going forward. And what types of grants and contracts that you're looking to get into. As an organization, if you were getting similar type grants all from one agency, that might be something that a person, whether existing or within another job description, could manage because it's consistent. You know, in the county's example, they might have all different types of federal funding sources. It's much more of a complex environment that there's different rules and regulations for the different types of funding that they receive.
So I understand that each federal agency has their own separate requirements. Is
Well,
that right?
yes and no. Within the compliance supplement, they've identified steps A through N that are the different types of compliance requirements. Every year they publish a new compliance supplement, and those haven't changed in the last 20 years. But previously, 15 years ago, the agencies, they could have picked 15 of them and said, these are all important to us. So we as auditors would have to test those things. A number of years ago, they tried to streamline it, and that makes the audit cost very different. You know, if you're taking funding from an agency that picked 15 tests, it makes the audits more expensive. And are you really getting more out of it when you're testing that many things? So a few years ago, they kind of streamlined it and they told the agencies, pick 6, pick your top 8. You can't have auditors test everything. You still need to be in compliance with everything. So if you have Davis-Bacon or if you have something within the grant agreement, even though it may not be what that agency picked as it's what your auditor is going to test, you still have to comply with it. But that process a few years ago really helped to provide efficiency and streamline the external audit processes so that the audits looked more consistent from organization to organization.
Once you submit your audit, your report, is there some sort of validation that, yes, the government says, yes, you're in compliance and
Yep.
you get
Yeah, they post that on a website, don't they?
Yeah, it's the Federal Audit Clearinghouse.
Yeah.
So once the entire audit is complete and the single audit is complete, then We will log into this. We work together to log into the system, enter everything that is in the compliance report into their system. We upload a copy of the ACFR and we upload a copy of the single audit package, the report package. Someone at Loudon Water will certify from the auditee's perspective that all of these things are true and accurate. I will certify as the auditor, certain, the things that are in there is true and accurate and the audit was complete. And then Loudon Water will submit that for the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. If there are any findings within the process, they are input into the system so that the agency is made aware that they have a grantee that has findings relating to their funding source. I rarely have that on occasion, but it doesn't happen in every audit. But generally it gets stored, it becomes public information. So all of that is stored on the Federal Audit Clearinghouse's website. And that's kind of, it closes the process. You'll receive an email saying that it was accepted. And normally that happens pretty quickly when they're clean.
Little last year happened pretty
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Yeah.
quick. And no more, I was pleased to see it's going well.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you for the detailed explanations. It's very helpful.
No, happy to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll bring all of that back to our exit conference. And as I have in the past, I'll probably bring Brian Newland if you have any IT questions. It's above my ability and skill set. I will own it. So,
So we'll look to schedule that soon. It will be the end of May.
End of
that
May.
We'll have the
Okay.
closing audit committee meeting.
Okay. That's our next, we don't have anything in the interim, it's just the end.
Like Jennifer said, if there was a major
Right.
issue,
Stuff
then
that
she
stuff
would
that came out, yeah,
contact you.
right,
Yeah.
but it's, as it is in years past, it'll just be until
Mhm.
end of May, thereabouts, okay. All right. Very good, thank you
Very much.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn,
I make a motion to adjourn.
My second.
no objection,
Aye.
we adjourned.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you.